You are listening to a Roamcast with Neil Kramer.
I'm in a pretty much deserted parking lot on the east side of Portland, and it's funny to be here after having spent the last 20 days really in very beautiful natural locations, out there with the bears and the salmon and the mountain lions, and now I'm here near IKEA. It's a nice contrast, amusing and a little bizarre. And the summer has gone away, I think. The sky is filled with huge charcoal clouds, and it is cooler. It's like 68 degrees, which is fantastic. This is so good. It's so good. And it seems that the food always tastes better as the fall approaches, and people's clothes are more interesting somehow. So I like this time of year. I think a lot of introverted people enjoy autumn. I think this is going to be a bit of a bumper episode with all kinds of interesting things that I want to share with you and reflect upon. The first thing I wanted to consider is culture. This is something I speak about a lot in my work. It used to be a good word, i.e. its natural resonance meant something good, and it mainly doesn't anymore. Because when I speak about culture, I'm not usually talking about human culture. I'm talking about what I refer to as machine culture, which is mainstream, corporate, military, industrial, fake culture that is foisted upon the unthinking rabble and delivered to them to say, this is it, this is your culture, this is what you do, this is what you wear, this is what you listen to, this is what you watch, this is what you read, etc. And in thinking about that, I recall that about 10 years ago, there was this TV show that came on the air on the BBC in England called The Culture Show. And it focused on the arts, literature, film, music, fashion, theatre and so on. And I think it's still going on now, this show. Very British, very conservative, I would say, in its core values. And it was meant to represent the exciting face of Western and indeed world culture. And occasionally there was some okay stuff on there, but most of the time, and I mean 95% of the time, the culture that they discussed and filmed felt very detached from the life that I saw around me, life in the places that I frequented in the British Isles, like in Cheshire and Manchester and Lancashire and Wiltshire, Somerset, Devon, Cornwall and Cumbria, and further north into Edinburgh and Glasgow. It wasn't the art and the culture and the vibrancy and the human expressions that I saw. It was something else. So I felt it was very unrepresentative, injudicious, misleading even. And so when I used to sporadically sit down and watch this thing, The Culture Show, one question would echo through my mind. And I can clearly recall it now because it's taken on a deeper meaning. One fundamental inquiry into the nature of the culture that they were broadcasting. And that question was this: whose culture? Whose culture are they talking about? Because it's not my fucking culture. And I felt no authentic impulse in it. No resonance of the sovereign human life force. Just little subjective ruminations. No ground-level spiritual dimension, nor any revolutionary perspectives. On the contrary, it just seemed to prop up the empire, the construct, the distortion. And I asked the question today, what culture is it that Los Angeles and New York are dishing up to the world, or Tokyo, Paris, London? You know, do you feel like it's your culture that is being televised and put forth? Is it your culture? Google culture is not human culture. Apple culture is not human culture. Samsung is not human culture. And yet most human beings in America and Britain over the age of 13 use one or more of their products or services every day. And though we may use Facebook and Twitter, indeed as I do, to spread awareness, attempting, one would hope, to leverage their technologies for higher purposes, the root of those systems is crooked. It is a bitter root. So for those who are using it as it was designed, which is to socialise online and network intimacies with strangers, that reflects a deep wrongness for me. Facebook makes life worse. And what about Sony and Time Warner and Disney, NBC, Universal, 21st Century Fox, Viacom? Well, they are the six conglomerates, to use that old-fashioned word, that constitute 90% of the US and Canadian box office. They are Hollywood, and they are making the movies that shape minds. And the nature and executive ownership of these organisations, if you don't already know who's running them, what do they have in common? Well, that is worth your investigation. Take a look at that. The Culture Show, well, it did have this very super lady called Verity Sharp, there's a name for you, presenting it for a while, who is just totally lovely. But the narrative that she was reading and that she was presenting, along with other co-presenters, was poor, and it served only to remind me that the culture that is proposed to us as our culture is not our culture at all. Corporate culture is imperial culture. It is the culture of the empire, the music of the hierarchy. It is the art of the godly men, the pharaohs, who are still with us today, in case we'd forgotten that. I have visited many of the centres of cultural excellence in Europe. Italy, France, Germany, Austria, and for that matter, Greece and some of the Eastern European countries like Bulgaria, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, or the Czech Republic as it is now. And emanating from these places, you know, in Rome, Florence, Vienna, Paris, Bonn, Berlin, Salzburg, there's great centres of European refinement, supposedly. And we see that the apparently creative wonders of fine architecture and classical music and painting, literature and cuisine, you know, they all come from these places. The composers that we are meant to revere frequented these places. Beethoven, Bach, Mozart, Chopin, Handel, Brahms, all those guys, you know. You know, those classical radio stations were like presenting this as high art, a pinnacle of human achievement. But what are those composers composing? What are those orchestras playing? They are playing, whether with happy consent or begrudgingly, the music of the empire, imperial culture, the march of the Black Church set to music. Not the most popular view, that. And of course there is so much lovely music to soak up, beautiful, beautiful music. But for me, it's the Russians who seem to imbue real urgency and fire and insurgency into their stuff, like Stravinsky and Shostakovich. Real beauty there that, for me, surpasses Beethoven and Mozart because of what they were doing. Not the structure and the order of the music, which admittedly Mozart and Bach and Beethoven had something very beautiful occurring, there's no question about that. But it isn't the music of the people. The music of the people is more rewarding and meaningful, and often much more beautiful than the music of the empire. Centuries of folk music, rich, intrepid, beautiful portraits of real human life, real love and loss and hardship and moments of revelation and revelry, community, melancholy, joy. Let's turn to these shores. We have now, I think, more than a century of blues music, and I was listening to some of these old wax recordings from God knows when just recently. Amazing stuff right there that pretty much is the foundation for a lot of regular sort of rock music. Expressions of soul deep feeling about reality and relationships, from the kitchen to the grave, from the womb to the mountaintops and everything in between. But what I want to draw your attention to is something even more iconoclastic and innovative than blues, and that is jazz. Why do I like jazz? Simple, because it so swiftly breaks down centuries of old musical structures and does something very new. And it is from the street, it is from the heart, from poverty and vice and sadness and togetherness and being in the moment, and from love, which a lot of imperial music is most certainly not. And it was these musicians from New Orleans and Chicago and New York in the 20s and 30s, and later, of course, in the 40s and 50s and 60s, which is the sort of music I like, who were doing something infinitely more sincere and substantial than almost anything in the classical genre. People like Miles Davis, John Coltrane, Charles Mingus, Herbie Hancock, Thelonious Monk, Art Blakey, Charlie Parker, Bill Evans, Cannonball Adderley, Chet Baker, Art Pepper, Jerry Mulligan, and loads of other amazing, creative, virtuoso musicians and composers. And for any jazz aficionado out there, which I most certainly am not, I'm sure you would agree that the best entry point into the world of jazz, for those who don't know that music so well, is probably Miles Davis's 1959 album Kind of Blue, which is still incredible today. But the important thing is that this music is very anti-imperial. It is 5 guys in a smoke-filled basement sweating over their fretboards and keys and mouthpieces and drums and microphones. It is a organic human expression of life, an improvisation of what is real. You see that polarity, that interplay, so real. The shadow of the heroin and the hard liquor and the depression, and the light of comradeship, and love, and musical excellence. And it can be addictive and divisive, jazz. Some people love it, some people hate it. I used to listen to jazz a lot. Most of the musicians that I previously mentioned, most of their major works and stuff. But now, in the last 10, 15 years or so, it's pretty much, for whatever reason, almost exclusively metal and electronic music. People like Boards of Canada and Tycho, Ozric Tentacles, Opeth, Mastodon, Isis, stuff like that. Talented, innovative, free-thinking human beings making the music of the people. Real vibrations that are wholly consistent with human endeavour and very naturally opposed to the patterns of the empire. One other thought on that. Punk. Quite a few people think punk music is silly and pointless, and the punk ethic is nihilistic and meaningless. And I sort of get that, I understand. But one thing punk did succeed in achieving, especially in the late 1970s and into the 1980s, was saying no. Looking around at the world and saying no. Not sure what else, quite honestly, but it's not fucking this, no. I would rather explode, decay, rant, rave and rot into nothingness rather than augment this pathetic culture that places commerce at the heart of human society. Punks knew that. Even the most mindless punks had an innate sense of it. And the smart and thoughtful and philosophical punks, of whom I know many, they go a step further and comprehend that their initial no statement is the first step on a deep spiritual adventure. A pilgrimage of knowingness. It is what aims them at the truth, that initial no. But saying no is part of a process, in the same manner that examining conspiracy is part of a process. It's not somewhere to stay. To live purely in a state of saying no all the time is not enough, and ultimately it leads to destruction, which is fine. But that destruction is far more valuable when it is clearing the ground for a new creation, not just to destroy, but to make way for the new. A new construction of creative, empowered human community, human expression, human being. Then we can set fire to the old symbols with courage and reason, with a noble, compassionate, incisive mind. It's not all about love and bliss. And this is the value of the punk ethic, that it turns our attention to shadow from the beginning, both personally and collectively, and it sticks 2 fingers up to the old hierarchy, to the empire. Being alone is something we all experience every day. The amount of time we spend alone and how happy we are with that is dependent on the choices we have made in life. Have we chosen to live a very independent sort of life, like James Bond in our bachelor pad doing whatever the hell we like from one week to the next? Guns, whiskey, girls and travel. Or did you choose the life of the Waltons, with the constant toings and froings of children, family, brothers, sisters, cousins, the old and the young, chores, routines, mishaps, school, bedtime? Or maybe you chose the life of the lovers, you and your partner, hidden from the world together in some charming old garret room in Paris, with a tall open window looking down onto a courtyard, a half-drunk bottle of wine, fresh bread and cheese on the table. Nothing to do but entwine yourself in each other, drink deeply of the heart and the flesh, to dream together until you forget whether it is night or day. Did you choose a different life? Did you choose the life of the hermit, he who chooses aloneness, to wander in the forest, to meditate in caves and hollows, to live silently and with one's own sense of self as the sole witness to many of the joys and sorrows of life? Do you need someone else next to you to enjoy the sunset, or can you do it on your own? And then we have the opposite of that, the life of the socialite, who desires to be out every night, parties, dinners, balls, dances, soirees, fundraisers, openings, galleries, launches, ceremonies and whatnot. There are many choices we can make that affect our experience of being alone. How all those different lives that we just painted, how do those people feel when they are alone? How is the lover when she is alone? How is the family man when he is alone? So whatever way we choose, whichever elements appeal to us, we must deal with being alone. And of course it is good that we become comfortable and attuned with this state, to see it as an important part of one's life experience and expression. And we see in our lives, don't we, that people who feel they are alone too much want less of it. And those who are not alone enough, who are constantly in the presence of others, want more of it. This aloneness is a sort of emotional commodity that it seems we can either have a deficit or a surfeit of, and that can tip our balance either way. But we are all often alone. Every night when we go to sleep, we are alone in our unconsciousness, regardless of whether or not there is someone next to us in that bed. We are born alone. We die alone. And in little ways, we're alone in the bathroom, in the car on the way to work, walking the dog, walking through an empty building after hours. We are alone. I used to think that it was okay to be alone all the time. I used to desire that. I dreamt of having a little cottage in the far west of Ireland, in County Kerry maybe somewhere, out near Killarney or Waterville, and away from the stupidity of man, staring out into this lovely bleak emptiness, the cold blue of the Atlantic. Well, to cut a long story short, I did indeed spend some time there years later, more than once, both alone and with a special woman, and it was rubbish. I didn't like it at all. It was too disconnected somehow, too weird, too bleak. Not that the isolation itself bothered me very much, it didn't. It was the feeling of the land. Beautiful, but deactivated somehow. For me, perhaps not others. But this dream of the cottage in the west of Ireland, it was gone. It had vanished. And I was, to say the least, shocked, disappointed. That which had been a long-held vision of contentment and harmony and spiritual sanctuary turned out to be nothing of the sort. I had misconceived it. So, what had I miscalculated? Why didn't it work out? Well, I couldn't understand for a long time. Like many of these things in life, it takes a while to figure it out, to reflect upon it, to let it settle before we can understand it. But in the end, I finally got to it. And the misconception had been this. I had thought that by separating myself from what was not working in modern life, the fakery of the modern lifestyle, and the low consciousness that goes along with that, by distancing myself from all that stuff, all that ugliness, I would therefore find my own inner peace and truth. And that was incorrect. Finding a new space merely provided an opportunity for something to happen. And I found the environment for that, but I did not know what to do with it. And I was young, my consciousness was ill-disciplined, and my emotional landscape, critically, was very unmapped. And now today all those things are very different, thank the Lord. Maybe today the experiment would turn out rather differently. In fact, I know it would. Were I to go to those far shores, I'm sure I would have a very different kind of experience. But since that time I have discovered hundreds more astonishing places that resonate that special equilibrium of spiritual hermitage and natural flow, and that integrate into a community of spiritually alive, authentic human beings. So this feeling that I had imagined was only going to be conjured by isolation and separation is now no longer restricted to a certain kind of place. These locations of energetic harmony are all over the earth, and one can be instructed in how to locate them. I myself have learned how to do this over the years. But let's bring that down to all of us and our own inner selves for the moment. Here is a question for you. What is the difference between being alone and being lonely? What distinguishes the two states from one another? You know, knowing you are alone and it's okay, and knowing you are alone and it's not okay. Well, that little question right there is one of the foundational philosophical questions of life, I feel. It's one of those issues that we are very wise to examine. It is good for us to contemplate, because in this consideration we will come to see something vital about our relationship between ourselves and the world. Being alone is knowing that what you have right now, in this moment, no more or less, is complete. It is okay just exactly as it is. There's nothing else that needs to make it okay. It's already okay, exactly how things are. Being lonely is not knowing that what you have right now is complete just as it is. One is a state of balance, one is a state of imbalance. Both are okay and part of life. And the dreadful and beautiful irony of being alone is that very often, in order to come to know your innate completeness, you need someone else to mirror it for you. And then once we finally grasp that knowingness, that deep knowledge that we don't need anyone ever in our world to complete us, then we can choose to have these sublime and profoundly intimate relationships with people. A choice, not a need, a choice. Aloneness is beautiful. Together is beautiful. Balance is what makes these okay. If we genuinely do not have enough social or intimate or affectionate expression in our lives, go and do something about that. And how do we do that? Well, by first of all accepting that it is possible, that we already have completeness and harmony within us. We just don't know how to activate it. And it might be... Gosh, the rain has come now. It might be wonderful to have a special person come into our lives to help with our understanding of completeness and aloneness and togetherness. And it would really only truly be harmonious and fruitful if we were doing the same thing for that person too at the same time, showing each other our unconsciousness, bringing light to each other's blind spots. And where you bring light, it will be an easy thing for you, one of your natural strengths, and vice versa for them. Where you need light and you have shadow, they can bring it because it is complementary. So we need not concern ourselves with the how of it. You just do it. This is why loneliness is a lot like waiting. That sense of a being lost in an unknown interval, drifting in the space of uncertainty, waiting hours or days or years. Because when we unconsciously dwell in our loneliness, when we begin to accept it as some sort of melancholic penance, we are secretly waiting for the justified completeness to come to us, to make us whole. We are waiting for that wholeness, and that is quite understandable, and yet it will never arrive. It will never arrive unless we make it happen. We have to make that 51% effort before the universe begins to collaborate with us and brings to us that mysterious 49%. That magical manifestation that seems to be out of reach. The universe can connect what logic cannot connect. It is extremely cohesive and synchronous, beyond the imagination. It networks the known to the unknown. It introduces delightful strangers and locates hidden things, mends broken circuits, changes the unchangeable. It gives us truth and authenticity. We just have to demonstrate our effort to ourselves and to the universe. And we do that by looking, yes, but more by listening, contemplating, by going out into the chaotic, unpredictable strangeness of the world and having a go, journeying. Journeying is important, whether it's out to the park for an hour or two, or off into the forests for months. But more than anything, the journeying is being prepared to become a new you. That is the real journey. To change. To grow into something unknown. Slowly but surely. To become something different.
Nationwide is on your line. Nationwide is on your line. 877-393-444. Those are his favorite commercials. Stop. Stop, silly. Hey. Relax.
You will know people in your life who seem to be riddled with drama. Every time you speak to them, there is some commotion in their lives. You know, it lays waste to their expectations, doesn't it? To their happiness and their peace of mind. And do you ever think, hang on a second, this person always seems to be dealing with some bloody drama. If it's not one thing, then it's another. Do you ever think that when you speak to these people who are stalked by drama? Is it because they are authoring the dramas themselves and don't know it? Correct. Register that. And then there are people who seem to be relatively free from drama. Very tranquil, harmonious. Things happen, yeah. Accidents, mistakes, yep. Adventures are had, revelations explode in life. But these people do not require the superfluous accompaniment of drama. They don't need it, so they don't do it. They don't author it. They don't bring it about. It's not necessary. And there's an important connection here. The secret of a happy life is simplicity. The more complexity you facilitate in your life, the more you bring in, the less harmony you can sustain. With simplicity, harmony is easy to sustain, and that level is different for all of us. For me, I need a lot of simplicity in my life. If there were always millions of things going on and I was always really busy, that would constitute a failure for me. Let's bring our philosophical screwdriver to this quandary, deconstruct it for a moment and see what we're actually dealing with here. Because until we do that, with all the things that we wish to know about, we are not dealing with their essence, but with their nebulous appearance. And that's not enough for the mystic, not nearly enough. So, thinking of drama, we can say that the dictionary definition, or thereabouts, of drama is this: a situation that has stark, emotional, conflicting characteristics, such as the drama inherent in a big murder trial in court. Now, the key things here are conflict and emotions. For a synthetic drama to be conjured into the world, there has to be opposition. It's always present. There has to be an opponent, an opposing force of some type, some thing or person, situation. There has to be an adversarial element. There has to be rumour, scandal, secrets, and that spice of gossip. And the players attempt to assert their side as the one true victorious version of events, these metaphorical chess players. And I have been, as I continue to be by so many things in life, astonished by the prevalence of drama in the lives of people who should, quite frankly, know better. On my travels in the world, and especially in the world of alternative thought, speaking to spiritual seekers and whatnot, I have been amazed at how much drama people are conjuring into their lives. And this is in Cheshire, Manchester, California, New York, Oregon, Portland, everywhere I've ever been, all over. And I am coming to regard the existence of drama in people's lives as a marker of immaturity, because the real student of the mystical, the committed pathwalker, dissolves drama wherever they encounter it. They know it is antithetical to growth and unnecessary. It draws consciousness into a very low resonance. You know, conflict and emotions. Conflict is only possible when we are thinking in binary, this or that. As soon as you go analog, as soon as you have the whole spectrum, the white, the 5 million shades of grey and the black, then things work very differently. Our emotions only run away with us. They only have power over us when we don't know how to use them. Like not knowing how to use a knife properly, and you keep slicing your thumb with it. And then you see over there's some other person, and they're just very adept. And they're making these beautiful dishes, this extraordinary food for a very lovely dinner. And they're using the same knife as you've got, but they know how to use it. They know how to use it safely and properly and expertly. And we cut our thumb with our emotions sometimes. We feel that searing pain. Often accompanies the very appearance of the knife, because we know what's coming, and that line of crimson blood appearing as the blade cuts into the flesh. It's right there in our mind when we see it. Pavlov's dog. Ow! You have injured yourself with your own instrument. This is what we do over and over until we become accomplished in using our own emotional technology, until we learn how to wield this most marvellous blade with experience and knowingness and dexterity. You know, it's very like that. It's very like that, the emotional landscape, the emotional toolkit. You might reasonably observe a number of things here when examining someone who is constantly surrounded by human interpersonal drama, conflicts and emotions. Number one, they are authoring it themselves. Number two, they are emotionally inarticulate. Number three, they are given to resonating fantasy, exaggeration and delusion. We all do this, but some people really do it. Really do it. These are plain, simple observations based on hundreds of encounters and repeatable, consistent characteristics in all these sort of human theatres. And we need not judge anyone on these things. If they are mired in drama, are they a bad person? No. We can never really judge anyone until we are fairly, deeply and truthfully judged ourselves, which is a lifetime's work. So we're not talking about being judgmental. What we're saying is that we can observe unhelpful behaviour in someone and still appreciate their innate value and potential for growth. Yes, we can, as we can in ourselves. And that is the mark of a mature seer of men, to know that both can be okay. Together they can coexist. Just because someone is ignorant of their own immaturity doesn't mean they're a bad person. There are, in my experience, very few bad people in the world. Very few. But we have to observe what is, if we are to live truthfully. Not to continually accommodate other people's shadow and pretend everything is okay, but to say, in the right moment, this is this. It's not something else. This is this. Let us not engage other people in their dramas. Let us not help them perpetuate fictions and tantrums. Because when we are being dramatic in life, we are putting on our costumes, we are reading old scripts and walking onto the stage, and we are acting. We are participating in an imaginary tale for the purposes of examining ignorance, and it doesn't work very well. If you are having drama in your life, or you are clearly seeing it neutrally in someone else's life, there will invariably be someone who is playing the role of the antagonist, the bad guy. Well, let me say, the antagonist is the protagonist. The bad guy and the good guy are the same thing. The drama is being mirrored between them. People with great wisdom and experience in self-transformation rarely walk onto the stage of the dramatic. It serves no real purpose anymore. Because when we explore our emotional landscape, when we learn how to heal the old patterning, when we develop the humility to know when we are wrong and to grow, and to acknowledge the equal value of failure and triumphs, we don't need drama anymore. We don't need it. To frame it politely, this is what drama is. It is an unconscious amplification of inner themes, so we can see them on the outside, so people can identify them. It allows them to see it in a highly exaggerated and stylized manner, because the subtleties of the actual inner landscape elude them. They can't identify them. They're too small, too faint. So they have to be theatrical in order to examine these issues. For example, let us say that a man, John, has been given a very deep psychological text on the dynamics of faith and betrayal between two people. And John has been told that this particular kind of document cannot be read with the eyes of the mind in the usual way, but instead is to be read with the eyes of the heart. And John tries and tries and tries to read this thing with his heart, but he cannot. He just doesn't know how to do it. And so he pretends to have read it and says, "Thank you, that was a great book." And then he attempts to forget all about it. But life won't let him do that. So when he does come to issues of faith and betrayal in life, instead, his higher self offers the strategy of dramatic role play as a means of study. To have the thing acted out in life with protagonists and antagonists, with love and loss, with joy and sorrow. And so he goes about it. He goes about consenting to and participating in this drama. And he will do so repeatedly until he gets the message. Because for him, for reasons that we will go into another time, the eyes of his heart are closed. So he has to enact it kinetically, physically, in order to learn. And the fantastic thing about this clever, universal, show business is that all the actors and players concerned have to agree to it individually and as a group before it ever happens. So whilst they may have loved or hated each other whilst in the thick of the play, afterwards, after they have exited the 3D, they come together and rejoice. They hug and dance and love and laugh together. They have helped each other in this peculiar arena of earthly life. This is why emotional maturity is the most essential element of spiritual attainment in the physical. And for anyone who tries to be clever and say, well, there is no advancement, there is no attainment, there is nothing that needs to be done, we already have everything inside us. Yes, we do. But it needs to be unlocked through experience, through great work, great commitment, great discipline. There is much to be done. The most awesome of adventures is here, right in front of you today. This is it. And it is necessary for us to embrace it utterly if you ever want to leave this place of your own free will. It is good for us to have compassion and patience for those immersed in drama, in acting out drama. I know, it's not always easy, is it? But it's good to cultivate a patience and a tolerance for that, where appropriate. Because good people need to go through this enactment. They need to do it for now. They require those histrionics, and that is their path, their life choice. And none of our business. Let us love them. Let us accept them. Let us respect their choices. And you may have to love them from a distance, frankly. And then get on with your own adventure. Play your own game. Don't worry about what anyone else is doing. That is your choice, to act with honour and high conduct. To accommodate those who cannot accommodate themselves sometimes does fall upon us, yes. And those who have chosen to submerge themselves in physical drama, they are in no position whatsoever to give us accounts, observances, and psychological portraits of anyone else. No one. They cannot do it for themselves. They cannot do it for anyone else. We have to let their stories of who did what to who go in one ear and out the other. Many years ago, I learned to stop paying attention to what people say about one another. Whoever they are. It's nearly always wrong. Very few wise men and women, very, very few, care to observe on other people. It just doesn't happen because it isn't necessary. The common man's remarks and analyses of other people are immaterial. So the stories that we tell about each other are basically meaningless. I talked about something recently that is related to this. For many years now I have been experimenting with removing whole concepts from my intellectual, emotional and physical equipment. For example, I have lived now for about 15 years without any need for the thing we call trust. I do not trust or distrust anyone, nor do I care if anyone trusts or distrusts me. I have found personally, through this experimentation, no need for trust. It seems extraneous to my life. I have cut it out because its maintenance and its very existence didn't seem to do anything, have any purpose. I don't need to trust you one way or another. You don't need to do anything for me. I have no expectations of you. I don't need you to be anything. Do whatever you wish to do. Be whoever you want to be. Act however you want to act. You cannot betray me because there is nothing to betray. If you attack my body or my reputation or my character, then so be it. But those things are not me. You cannot touch me. If I do feel hurt if you attack my character or whatever, then philosophically I am in error in my own identification with that artificial construct of character. So in the end, there is nothing to protect. things of real substance do not require defending. The truth requires no defense, no trust. When we reach a certain point in our spiritual realization, and there's a long history of this, we come to know that there is zero requirement for many previously cherished and beloved human concepts. Things like trust, belief, fealty, morality. They begin to dissolve because we can do something better. All there is, living now as a human being, is the harmony of our individual actions with the universe around us. There are emanations of harmony and there are emanations of disharmony, and that's it. And until we are ready for that level of simplicity, which is devastatingly powerful, it's something that we actively repel for most of our lives, because it's very raw and potent in its divinity. Until we're ready for that, we continue to invent fantasy commandments for human conduct. The architects of the main Abrahamic religions love to do that, to dupe their flock into this nonsense. The Christians, the Jews, the Muslims. Laws make them feel safer and better. The idea that there really aren't any laws is very unsettling to them. It's not that it doesn't occur to the common man to question religious authority. They're not that stupid. It's more a question of emotional laziness and philosophical disavowal. To just go along with the program is just a hell of a lot easier. It is better, even, to live these synthetic human dramas that we've been speaking of than to live the crushed, repressed pretense of the religious follower. But whether we follow a program or a religious icon, a saviour, any follower is stupid. I don't care if you're following a man or a woman or a deity or a sixth-dimensional avatar, a rock band, a novelist, a peace movement, a radical political group, fucking anything. I don't care. When you follow, you renounce. You resign from your position as divine human adventurer and drift into the slime world of identifying as a follower of the unreal, the one-dimensional, the defunct. What a funny thing to do. What a marvellous adventure in disharmony.
I have now relocated to a very comfortable living room. Listening to the incredible nonsense about Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman, one's thoughts are naturally drawn to questions of race. Seeing these marches and demonstrations about ethnic profiling and racial equality, a religious parade as well that I witnessed in recent weeks, and all these ponderings go into the whole consideration of what it is we think we are identifying with and what we are trying to defend and uphold when we trumpet our race or our religion or our nationality or our sexuality, especially in light of what we've just talked about earlier in this recording. And for me, it seems odd that anyone who has reached a minimal level of self-awareness would ever identify with a race or a nationality or a religion or a political or ideological allegiance or a sexual orientation, and, somehow feels that any of these things are foundational in determining who we are. If I were to primarily express my identity to you as white, English, Methodist, heterosexual, then I think you'd have turned off a long time ago. If those things were up the top of the list every time there was this dialogue, every time I gave an interview or put pen to paper, you'd think, what's that got to do with anything? If I had these things right up there as key factors in who I am and what I'm doing in this world, if that was the case, then I would expect to be just after Justin Bieber on your philosophical playlist. Bless him. These things are quite irrelevant to the business of the authentic human being, their mind, heart, will, spirit, development and expression on earth. For the mystic, who is actively engaging with their ascendant impulse, matters of race and nationality and sexuality are not considerations. If I were to go on about my whiteness or my Englishness, or how I was christened a Methodist, and how I attended a Church of England elementary school, or discuss my rich catalogue of heterosexual intimate experiences, then surely you would wonder what the hell I was talking about, and what possible bearing these things have in relation to the deeper matters of existence, which is what we have become accustomed to discussing. If someone were to sincerely ask me, "Who are you? Tell me about yourself. Who are you in this world?" I would say I am a human. I spend much of my time contemplating, and I am trying to live as truly as I can. Any and all thoughts of race, nationality, religion and sexuality would have fuck all to do with it. Nothing. In fact, I cannot think of any conversations in recent times with all the fantastic free-thinking people whom I have had the privilege to commune with, where any of those things played any role in how that person defines themselves, how they regard their being. It's not relevant. Not at all. In fact, these things are distractions, trivial, not bad, inconsequential though, of the same order of importance as what colour socks I'm wearing, or whether I prefer Swedish death metal or Siberian electronica, or if I could only ever eat one meal for the rest of my life, would it be German braised beef or the spaghetti bolognese that my mother used to make? You know, these are things in the world. They have reality. They have connections, but they do not feature very high up on the list of how I identify myself, how I consider my radiance in this world. So when I see someone identifying their core being with their race, nationality, religion or sexuality, I see someone who is embracing ignorance rather than knowingness. In my line of work, I encounter all sorts of people. You know, extraordinary range of ethnicities and religions, sexual orientations, gender expressions, nationalities, careers, tonalities, and fundamentally personal, diverse life choices. And you know what? None of that stuff is ever really important, those things that are there in front of us. It doesn't really affect the way we go about our spiritual evolution. Don't let the government and its rubbish think tanks scam you into falsely elevating matters of race, country, church and sexuality in your life. Don't fool yourself into thinking that these things deserve to be in any way high up on your list of who you are and what you're doing. If you want to fight for any of these things, then please go ahead, feel free. Feel free to put all your time and effort into these matters and see where that gets you. I genuinely don't give a fuck what colour someone is, what piece of soil they came from, what church they're involved with, or what they like to do with their genitals. I couldn't care less. Seriously, I couldn't care less. I observe and regard people based on their quality of consciousness, their wisdom, experience, movement, love, growth. The only measure worth a damn. Let us rise above the well-intended but nevertheless unwise activists who think they're helping to promote racial solidarity, which is separation, equality, which is division, and social justice, which is hierarchy. These are servants of shadow. Don't for a moment think that any race has it harder than any other. They do not. The purest of white Anglo-Saxon personages, when they take a brief look at their own history, see profound physical, financial, mental and spiritual bondage that has lasted 3,000 years at least. So when the latest poor bastards come along, who are pointing to one form of separation or disadvantage or discrimination, wake the fuck up, welcome to the being shat on club, and look around to your left and your right and see that all the other poor people, however brown or white they are in the same boat. And if you can't see that, then you haven't studied your history. You haven't studied your neighbour's history very well. We've all been beaten, shackled, raped, starved, exploited and genocided. All of us. Don't think anyone has any special privilege or exclusivity on that. Show me any creed who hasn't tasted that. You can't, because we all have. So those races and nationalities who think they have some kind of extra special oppression, bollocks. Bollocks. No one has any singular claim on that. It's just who's getting the boot today. Let's be cleverer than that. Let's be more honest with ourselves than that. We could say that there are 7 main continents on this planet, though that can be 7 or 6 or 5, depending on how you calculate it. Let's say there's 7 continents. We could also say that the differing races that inhabit these remarkable, unique pieces of land undergo fantastic developments in their biological expression, in their bodies, in their minds, in their bones, in their blood, so they can thrive in these places. And from smallest to largest in terms of landmass, that is Asia, Africa, North America, South America, Antarctica, Europe and Australia. So, for thousands of years, before there were mass transit of human beings, before these migrations happened, people stayed where they were born. You stayed where you were. You stayed on your corner of your continent. Let's look at the numbers of that for a minute, I mean, these are formal national censuses, United Nations and CIA numbers here, so they are mainstream calculations, but they may serve us as reasonable indicators for what I'm articulating here. So in terms of countries, which we think are so important and so historically relevant, the top 7 most populated countries on Earth are as follows. Number 1, China, with 1.3 billion people. Number 2, India, with 1.2 billion people. The USA, with 316 million. So that's an enormous drop straight away from number 2 to number 3. 4, Indonesia, with 237 million. 5, Brazil, with 193 million. 6, Pakistan, with 183 million. And 7, Nigeria, with 173 million. But there's a problem with that. These statistics are misleading. For the student of esoteric world history, delineating soil into countries and nations is a very murky business. And we soon learn not to give tremendous credence to the fleeting blips on the radar of these funny things that we call nations. The history of the English or the Chinese or the Americans, forget it. There's no context, it's too narrow, it doesn't mean anything on its own. The esoteric historian takes a slightly different approach. We can't go into all the details, but we can look at the principle that's at work here. Not long ago, in the geological timeframes of mysticism, Canada, Alaska, America, and Mexico were all one place. Of course they were. And the peoples of that place developed to adapt to the different temperatures, precipitation, sunlight, plants, animals, resources, and telluric land resonances of their particular area. If you were in the far north, your race would be adapted to that region. In the middle, you would be balanced to reflect seasonal changes. In the south, your face and feet and dreams would reflect the unique conditions of your land. All the races very different from one another, not the same, naturally different, necessarily dissimilar, unequal. Our skins, our organs, our brains, our senses, our instincts, our genetic patterning, our ascendant impulses, all completely distinct from one another, in harmonic reflection with the land itself, with the land and its relationship to the sun and to the water and the trees and the sand and the wind and the rock, to the very elements themselves. In this way, race is a description of your biological relationship with the elements. It is a marker of your current elemental patterning. To suggest, therefore, that they're all the same is meaningless. We have to consider, rightfully, that all biological tendencies can be transcended, should we so wish, through consciousness, through willed growth, through natural unfoldment, through reason, through insight and wisdom. So there is both nature and nurture. We arrive with old impulses and with powerful instinctive elemental patterning, and we have the ability to develop new impulses and repattern, should we desire it, should we so wish. However, is there a good reason for your basic elemental patterning? You bet there is. You bet your bottom dollar there is. And it behooves us to contemplate that as deeply and bravely and thoroughly as we can. It doesn't define who you are, but it shows you a trajectory, and it shows you a set of studies, a set of root teachings that might be particularly appropriate for you. So now, with a broader approach, we can see this in another way. Let's look at population in terms of whole continents, not the countries, the continents. Approximate numbers here, rounded off to illustrate what's important, but good enough. Asia, 4 billion. Africa, 1 billion. Europe, 700 million. North America, 500 million. South America, 400 million. Australia, 30 million. Antarctica, 12 people. The official number at a given moment in time we were doing research. Let's say that these constitute the main races, these broad continental expressions. So what is your lineage? Where is your biological equipment historically and currently designed to harmonise with? For many of us, we don't have to go very far back to see that we have a mix of these races. We all do. So we might be able to communicate with all kinds of lands, therefore, some more than others. Do you think it's unreasonable to suggest that our biological expression predisposes us, for a time, to work well with a particular part of the planet? In that climate, in that energetic resonance, with its flora and fauna, with its elemental patterning, with its profound wisdom, isn't that a good thing? Doesn't it show us something? I'll tell you what, this little hairy white Englishman, your speaker right now, found that to be very true when in the middle of the Sonoran Desert. It's obvious, okay? It's obvious. More importantly, though, doesn't that mean that each of the races cannot, in any way, be valued one above another? In the same way that we cannot place the wolf above the tiger, or the elephant above the leopard, or the eagle above the hummingbird. That would be stupid, bloody stupid. It is also stupid to say that they're all the same. That is false and dangerous. The races are different by design. What the system is really implementing when it works towards equality is actually the reverse. It seeks standardization. When it says diversity, it means uniformity. Talk of equal opportunities is talk of global restriction. Our uniqueness is our power. The old hierarchy have purposefully brought together the most incompatible groups. And incompatible groups do exist. Please don't imagine they don't. I've seen them up close and personal all over Europe and America. I've seen them for decades. And they have swelled population numbers, our old hierarchy imperial controllers, to unsustainable levels by design, particularly in Asia and Africa and Eastern Europe. And they've been doing that for about 1,000 years. Population levels now so high that few communities, nations and infrastructures can actually support them. There are too many people here. Go to Britain and walk around London and Birmingham and tell me I'm wrong. Race and population have been brought to positions of imbalance in order to prolong the injustice of the world economy and, crucially, to establish a tinderbox of human division that can be ignited when the time is right, to ensure that humans don't get together and just say a simple no to dishonourable ways of living. Instead, they will fight to defend rights and cultures that are entirely illusory. Cultures that are fabricated and empty. Cultures that were never theirs in the first place. They will squabble and kill each other. The code word for this horror in Europe is multiculturalism. But not unsurprisingly, the control system strategy of disguising division as culture has not worked, which is really very fascinating. It's gotten really bad in Europe, just so you Americans out there know. If you listen to Red Ice Radio, you might hear the usually mild-mannered Henrik get very worked up about this issue, and rightly so, rightly so. It needs a bit of fucking passion injected into it, so well done, Palmgren. In Germany, in 2010, Chancellor Merkel said that Germany's attempt to create a multicultural society has, quote, utterly failed. Recognising the enormous problems that they have in Germany with immigration and Islam polarising people in that land, she said that allowing people of different cultural backgrounds to live side by side without integrating has not worked in a country that houses 4 million Muslims. Now, Islam and Christianity, Judaism, I don't care. I am respectful of any Muslims or Jews or Christians. When there is tolerance and open-mindedness, it's a choice, okay. When there isn't, I lose patience really fast. So if it's Islam's turn to be fundamentalist, then maybe they get it at the moment. But believe me, it wasn't long ago before it was us Christians who were crushing the world on our own jihad. You know, the French Premier Nicolas Sarkozy in 2011 said, "We worry way too much about the identities of those who've arrived here rather than about the identity of the very country taking them in." You know, no kidding. It's not a racial comment, that, obviously. That's clear for whatever country you're talking about, whenever, whoever the country is, whoever the incomers are, it doesn't matter. Obvious. And asked whether he felt that there were problems with the policy of encouraging religious and cultural differences, he said, quote, "Clearly, yes, it is a failure." And our guy, in 2011, the hilarious schoolboy Prime Minister, David Cameron, stated that the multiculturalism that the UK has established resulted in segregated communities behaving in ways that run completely counter to British values. And he said, quote, "Under the doctrine of state multiculturalism, we have encouraged different cultures to live separate lives apart from each other and apart from the mainstream." Apart from each other. The vast insoluble problems that the old hierarchy created in the UK and Sweden and Germany and France and Italy and Holland and all over are going to see the biggest race wars we've ever seen. Just when we need to come together. It's all perfectly strategized and timed. Divide them when they are in most danger of uniting. This is what government-sponsored, corporate-funded multiculturalism is for. Division. As the Russian political commentator Sergei Mikheyev says, the policy of multiculturalism in Europe has failed. Immigrants are not integrating into the Western society. On the contrary, they do everything to lead a segregated lifestyle and establish closed communities with their own rules. They use the material luxuries that the Western countries provide, but they want to live according to their own laws and beliefs. This is absolutely true. Interesting, because many people in Britain and Europe feel afraid to talk about these matters because they'll be labelled a racist. And now the supposed leaders are saying it openly. It's starting to become okay to discuss these things again. Because the leaders are doing it, so now you're allowed. This is mind programming, this is laughable. If we can't discuss the excellence and differences between our races, then we're in trouble, aren't we? So we have to think very clearly about this and see that it's a very simple matter, race, very simple indeed. Let's do our Orwellian language check for a moment, doublespeak. Understand that when Eurozone leaders say multiculturalism, what they mean is division. What they're talking about, what they're implementing is racial partitioning. Never take their words at face value, always examine the language. In 1947, this bloke called Victor Klemperer wrote a book called The Language of the Third Reich, a philologist's notebook. This language of the Nazis, which he refers to as Lingua Tertii Imperii, LTI for short, was incredible. He suggested that the Nazis actually changed the German language to inculcate people with German nationalist ideas. And they did this by modifying the language to contain Nazi thinking, sensitizing people to certain things and desensitizing them to others. So they had doublethink type words which changed the way you think about something. For example, they used this word artfremd, which meant alien to the species. Artfremd. And it became popular in language at the time. And it contained the philosophy that the Nazis wanted to put into the minds of the common man. And ewig, eternal, like the eternal good thing like Deutschland, or the eternal bad thing like the Jews. That's what the Nazis wanted people thinking. And then straight switches, which we see today. So, crisis, they would say, instead of saying defeat. And instead of saying murder, the Nazis said special treatment, or intensified interrogation. And instead of saying forced deportation, they would say evacuation. So great portions of German society were evacuated. And they used these clever prefixes in front of words too in order to elevate a principle or an event or an ideology, to give the perception that something had a world resonance, a universal, understood resonance that was a lot bigger than just a few people. Volks, for example, Volks, means people. So we know it from Volkswagen or Volkswagen. An example of a term which has now outlived the Third Reich, but Volksgemeinschaft designated the racially pure community of nations. And we're doing exactly the same thing today in America and Britain and Europe. We're repeating these old tricks. And many of us, some of our older community members will remember this, but many of us have forgotten about this duplicity. And some of us are not even aware of it at all, because we've been using this LTI, as Klemperer put it, for such a long time. Defence means war. Custody means imprisonment. Education means conditioning. Jobs equals slavery. We need more jobs means we need more slavery. Freedom is empire. Bring freedom to the world. Democracy is collectivism, the destruction of the individual for the collective. Insurgency is freedom. This is the language of the empire. Why are Barack Obama, Joe Biden, Nancy Pelosi, Dianne Feinstein and Hillary Clinton so committed to destroying America and the wider world? How could these people possibly claim that they're aiming for a stronger, freer, more successful and happier America? How can they do this when that is so patently false? How can they get out of bed every morning and engage in this hideously dishonourable conduct? You know, just personally, how can they do that? Are they in with the old hierarchy? Are they initiated into the secret brotherhood of the ancient demons? Are they puppets of the demigod hybrid motherfuckers of Egypt? Well, maybe some of them are, but certainly some of them are not. Most of them are too thick and weak to be agents of shadow. But let me tell you something that we can say about many of our politicians and world leaders, something that gives us a concrete explanation that you could share with anyone why they're behaving so badly, why it's so broken. Let me describe a disease to you, a real one that is endemic in political circles and is responsible for many of the disasters around our lovely planet today. It is a disorder in which the individual is described as being excessively preoccupied with issues of personal adequacy, power, prestige, and vanity. And I quote, "Persons diagnosed with this disorder are characterized by unwarranted feelings of self-importance. They have a sense of entitlement and demonstrate grandiosity in their beliefs and behavior. They have a strong need for admiration but lack feelings of empathy for others. These qualities are usually defenses against a deep feeling of inferiority and of being unloved." End quote. So, what is this disorder? What is this disease of the mind that affects so many of our leaders? It is called narcissistic personality disorder, NPD for short. And people who demonstrate this NPD in their behaviour have all kinds of symptoms, such as needing constant attention, admiration and positive reinforcement from others, preoccupied with thoughts and fantasies of great success, great legacies they leave behind. They exaggerate their achievements. They constantly fail to recognise other people's emotions and feelings. They just tread all over them or completely ignore them. They expect others to go along with their ideas and plans. They're jealous of others. They are easily hurt and rejected. They have very fragile self-esteem, even though they appear as tough-minded or unemotional. Now, to me, that is a perfect description of Barack Obama, Silvio Berlusconi and Margaret Thatcher as the standout examples. What causes this? My idea is that it's a very simple thing. It results from emotional abuse, neglect or manipulation during the first 7 years of life, which is ordinarily a result of being exposed to a highly toxic emotional behaviour from adults, either intentional or unintentional, it doesn't matter. So a very common cause would be that the parent could not form an emotionally healthy and consistent empathic relationship with their child. And a sensitive child feels this and essentially grows up for the rest of their life feeling unimportant and somehow deeply inadequate, unworthy. And they would deny this, these people, because much of this operates below the level of the conscious mind. And I talked about this recently at a workshop. There's a couple of guys, a psychiatrist called Glenn Gabbard and another guy called Dr. Jeffrey Young, who think that NPD is all about reactions to shame. And I think that's spot on. My instinct says, despite my total lack of training in this area, yes, shame's a big thing. When a weak inner self is crushed by shame, and the individual does not know how to go about healing that, they resort to a series of complex strategies to protect themselves, and we call this strategizing NPD, narcissistic personality disorder. For their own mental stability, they have to protect the self at the expense of other people. They will frequently devalue, criticize and blame others. They're constantly making enemies, these guys. Anyone who criticizes them becomes an enemy. They insulate themselves from reality. And if they can, they will act with extreme hostility of varying levels towards this enemy of theirs. So imagine that a person with NPD finds themselves in a position of power or is moved covertly into a position of power. Political, military, social, cultural, economic, corporate, industrial power. That kind of fake power, and yet has great influence on society. Imagine what kind of impressive dreadfulness they could conjure up, being mentally ill in this position. Have you ever met anyone like this? I have. I know people like this. They are mentally ill. They need help. They are not fit to be in any positions of responsibility whatsoever. And if these people don't get help, it tends to get worse. So if I were a shadow controller charged with securing an ongoing negative consciousness production on Earth for the purposes of fuel, I would specifically hire people with NPD to run government. That would work really well. And guess what? With one or two exceptions, that's exactly what we've got in the Western world. Mentally ill people in positions of administrative power. How exciting and bizarre is that? Because we are the ones here to resolve this mess, you and me. So I was talking to somebody recently about simple ways of hastening the downfall of inhuman governments. And we came up with some simple things, and there was loads of them, 15, then 12, then 10, and we boiled it down to 3 things. I'll share those with you, if I may, because I think you'll find them really interesting. The first one, don't bank with a big bank. Avoid giving your money to the large, centralised major banks, like Barclays, Bank of America, JP Morgan Chase, RBS, HSBC, Deutsche Bank, Citigroup, all those people. Now, I hold my hands up right now and say to you that I currently do bank with one of these organisations, though I am in the process of switching over. Now I am a permanent resident here in the US and I've got my green card, and now have some additional administrative freedom that makes things a little easier moving from East Coast to West Coast back and to. So I'm not there yet, but I intend to be. And this was further underscored by some advice from Catherine Austin Fitz, who I met very briefly at Paul Levy's house a few months ago here in Portland. She agrees that the faster we move our money away from the big banks, those who love centralisation, the better. And it has a very profound and immediate effect. It scares the shit out of them. It's a strange thing, contemplating something as practical and concrete as this, isn't it? Considering the philosophical and metaphysical models that we usually reflect upon. But there's an enormous misconception here with banking that is very illustrative of how the system controls common thinking. Many people have the notion that the bank basically safeguards our personal money by providing us with a private account, a place to keep money until we need to use it. A simple little transactional space that we use to help administrate deposits and withdrawals and so on. And maybe some loans or interest or savings and whatnot. A bank is nothing of the sort, no. When you put your money into a big bank, it becomes their money. They use that fake currency to centralise world resources, kill people all over the world, directly and indirectly, suppress human freedom, poison the water and the land, sustain inhumane corporations, and generally despiritualise human society. That is what they do with your money, and the more money we give them, the more they do it. So when we put our money into these little banks that have these pretty commercials on television and these dull adverts, we are funding those operations. Every penny we put into a big bank is another piece of freedom that we are transferring from our community and putting into the control system's war chest. So instead, if you need to bank with a local organisation with all the benefits that we've become accustomed to, but who are human-focused, not profit-focused, not empire-focused. There are actually people in there, in these credit unions and community banks, real people in positions of authority with balanced, humane, natural ethics and community conscience. Simple stuff, really. Or if you want to get really radical, perhaps you might even choose not to use money at all. Examine the nature of it, understand its spell. Don't use it. Don't use credit. Do not use Visa or MasterCard facilities at all, ever. Do something else. I've seen that in operation. I know lots of people who don't use money. It can work, but that takes real commitment. But the principle is, if you are using money, think about where you keep that. Because when you put that in the bank, you're consenting to something that you might not want to. Number 2, don't vote. When you vote, particularly in national elections, whichever way you vote, you are voting to prolong the old hierarchy. The empire, the control system, needs your vote. It doesn't matter whose name is on the paper, what boxes you tick. It's just the paper and your consciousness that matter. Any vote is a vote for the system. Now, a few people, probably over the age of 50, might be getting a bit upset now. Tough. Let me tell you how and why I stopped voting. I used to vote in the UK, like everyone else. I used to go to the local community centre or church or hall or whatever, stand in a little booth or box and tick a piece of paper and vote for a person. And then one day, when this came about again every 4 years, at a major national election for a new government, I went to the ballot box and had a little revelation. I looked at the choices I had to vote for, the blues, the reds, the yellows and the greens, and they were all crap. Empty, unwise, all of them. The Tories, Labour, the Lib Dems and the Greens, all crap. Lib Dems, Liberal Democrats. I didn't feel that any of them warranted my vote, deserved it. So I thought, naturally, well, I won't vote then. And then I got this twinge of guilt, like I was considering something vile and improper or criminal. And that nearly made me just pick the best of a bad bunch, vote and get out. But I didn't. I stopped. And I exercised my power of reason. I stopped, I stood still, stood alone in the world for a moment as a man who cares deeply about life and his community and his fellow humans. And I thought about it for a minute. Why did it feel wrong to not vote? And I thought that there were a number of considerations that went into that. What was nagging at my mind? Why did it feel wrong to not vote? And these considerations, I discovered that all of them were false installations of control system conditioning. So I went through these internal objections one by one and dealt with them, and they were these. Number one, it is my duty as a citizen to vote. It is a civic responsibility. Okay, I am not a citizen. Look into that. I am a natural, free man, and I have no duties that are any business of the government. The second obstacle was the idea that my grandfathers fought in the Second World War, as did millions, for the freedoms I enjoy today. So voting is an essential part of that liberty, and I owe it to them. My grandfathers did not know why they fought in the war. They thought they were fighting the evil Nazis for the freedom of England and Europe, but they weren't. They were fighting for reasons they did not understand, and despite their bravery and good intent, I owe them, and all the other hoodwinked millions, nothing. In fact, I honour their memories with far greater meaning and integrity by discovering why the Second World War came about, what the real reasons for it were, and exposing the treachery of both Allied and Axis governments in conspiring to murder millions of their own people for no good reason. The third consideration, the third obstacle, if I don't vote, someone crap might get into power. All the candidates were crap. They are always crap. The people on the ballot paper are always unwise and know nothing about the world and have no higher spiritual wisdom, as I would expect as a bare minimum for community governance. And they all have personal vested interests in upholding an inhuman system. They are all crap. Someone crap will definitely be voted into office, with or without me. If everyone was like me and didn't vote, then where the hell would we be? If no one votes, the system will fail. Good. That will demonstrate how pathetic it is. Whatever is left will be more truthful and constructive by its nature than pissing around with this ruinous nonsense. Let's do something else. Let's make communities that are genuinely independent, who don't need government approval for what they wish to do. Communities who act alone. Do that. Put your time, money, blood and sweat into that. Put your consciousness into something good like that. So those were the things that made me feel that not voting was bad, and when I thought about them, they were all false. So that was it. I intentionally spoiled my vote, as it were, by not voting for anybody and instead writing "We are free humans" across the face of the paper. I then folded the paper in two, put it in the little slot in the white box, and left. So to vote is consenting to prolong the agony. It's living with toothache for years instead of a couple of days. Now, if I lived in a little rural community with 500 people, 500 ace people, and one man or woman from that community was going to get elected to help run local affairs on our behalf. I mean, really step into an honourable and effective role, then I would vote. But as soon as it connects to outside national political interests of Labour, Democrats, Tories, Republicans, forget it. No vote. The funny thing is, a few years after stopping voting, I discovered that there was no such thing as a democratically elected national government anywhere in the Western world. No major nations have one or have ever had one. Democracy is a mirage. It is a con trick. And this is very hard to swallow at first. It takes years to internalise that truth without it knocking you over. But when you finally get to it and admit what you know in your heart to be true, that there is no democracy and that the government is not your friend, then not voting is the only reasonable course of action. So that was my second suggestion in hastening the end of empire. The third and final one, is a very simple thing you can do, and that is not to shop for pleasure. I don't mean shopping for things that you need, like food, clothes. I mean ceasing to buy things that you don't need. The system cannot properly function unless we pour our currency units into it. We sustain the system when we unconsciously buy crap from Walmart and Target and Apple and Samsung and Sony and go with trends and follow fashions and go to see rubbish blockbuster movies with Hollywood A-list actors and listen to fabricated pop music with people who aren't musicians and basically just unmindfully hand over money for stupid shit. If you're going to hand over money for something, try and make sure it's good money and it's a good thing you're buying. If you earn $20 for weeding an old lady's back garden and then you go and spend that on a meal that is cooked by a happy, excellent person using real vegetables from the ground, from the farm around the corner, all dished up in a cool place, then that is a reasonable exchange. That is good money and a good thing. But if your money is earned from gangster capitalism and exploitation, and you're throwing it down in bad places with bad ingredients, with unhappy, unmindful people, then you are just darkening the imperial shadow. Now, I think that most thinking people have largely stopped unmindful shopping. Most shopping malls around America now are gladly falling into decline, thank God. People have wised up. Now, the malls are often filled with a strange underclass of wide-eyed economic immigrants who haven't quite cottoned onto the idea that these malls are actually killing them. And these sort of financial nomads are still associating life success with amassing money and having things. We've all done that at one point or another, to greater or lesser extents. They will learn, as did the middle classes, that this is a silly mistake. Cloudy-headed shopping is a massively dysfunctional thing to do. It's not just a bit of fun. When you do need to buy stuff, try and get it from real people who produce real things with as little processing, corporatization and wankness as possible. It's not always easy to do that. Buying a smartphone or a laptop or using Visa, getting on an aeroplane, things I do quite a bit. I involve myself in this shit. I do. But I'm onto it, and I'm beginning to withdraw my consent from it more and more with every day. I am making efforts to counterbalance and offset these things by doing other, more giving things, real things with real people. Happy creations and meaningful services, right? Things that generate goodness and authenticity, nourishment, health, growth, quality, community. Simple, amazing things that we're all really good at. So if you work toward, as I am trying to do, these three simple things, don't bank with a big bank, don't vote, don't shop, then you will speed up the emergence of a better world. Because the old world is going away bit by bit all the time. It is disappearing anyway, whether you're here or not, whatever you do or don't do. But we can do our bit to pour conscious fuel on the fire of renewal. The whole thing's got to come down. It's not reverse engineerable. We cannot backpedal to the point where we can heal the epic mental illness that is running our world, economies, resources, military, education and media and government. They are beyond repair. The extreme ridiculousness that we have each wrought upon this planet is a group disavowal. We're all part of that. And the vacuous demons that we have created who embody our renunciation of God, they are here and they are destroying. That is what they're meant to do. We conjured them. They are terminal cases. The world is going to hell in a handbasket, and a hilariously unsustainable way of living that we have each consented to is going to be flushed down the galactic toilet. Why? Because we are withdrawing our consent from all this at last. It is a wonderful thing. It means that the ability for low resonance consciousness to be protracted indefinitely on this planet is over. Period. Thousands of years of suppression is about to end. It is ending now. You can track the endingness of it. And billions of people won't be able to handle that because they've been suckling on it like little piglets. So they're going to go away too. It is coming to a conclusion. All of it. This is a galactic cycle of renewal, as perfectly natural as a potato or a tomato, and as fresh and pure as a mountain stream. It is the purification of a planet, the natural advancement of a planet. The old patterns resolve, new ones arise. What is self-sustaining becomes ascendant. What is unsustainable becomes descendant. That which resounds with the truth of life at long last stretches its wings and eyes new, abundant territories. And that which harbours untruth becomes dust and blows away. We never need really worry about the end of the world, because it is never the end of the world, only the end of a way. The world cannot end because it is not a thing. It can no longer be contained and destroyed than we can capture a hurricane in a trash can. You can't do it. What we're focusing on here is the beginning of a new cycle. Again a cycle, but also new. Unique, fresh. This is the fire that purifies. This is the emanation of divine ordinance that will bring just providence to everything and everyone, each according to how they have lived inside and out. And there's nothing anyone can do to stop this. Nothing the naughty ETs or 4D hobgoblins can do to change what is happening. We're all going to be subject to it. No consciousness is powerful enough, individually channeled, to avoid this. We don't want to avoid it. And you know the best part about all this? You know why it's okay? This cataclysmic storm in a teacup. Why is this apocalyptic spasm so good? It is good because we are causing it. We are making it happen. We are pouring fuel on this fire. The more consciousness we invoke, the more integrity and power, human, creative, pure power, we allow to course through our veins, the more profound regeneration and the faster this planetary restoration of balance will unfold. It is the same principle at work that we see in the death of a wise old man. Is it a disaster that the 95-year-old sage succumbs to his physical frailty and pops his clogs? Is that a bad thing? How could it possibly be bad? How silly can we be, mourning the end of life when it is the end of nothing? It is the magnificent transition, the completion of a cycle, the conclusion of a body of wisdom. It is a human being sailing to the far shores where they finally embrace the tranquility, beauty, love, brotherhood and knowingness that they've always longed for on earth, but in truth never quite found, because here there are only traces of those things. That is why we have to be so strong here in this strange, despiritualized realm of vivid polarization and interminable dissolution. Here, this is not a place for perfection, not yet. This is a place for elite spiritual training, for mending patterns, for learning, for healing, for seeding unity. Rest comes later. And even after that rest, there is the next adventure, and the next, and the next. Because when we've had our 1,000-year vacation, our timeless, luscious immersion in unspeakable joy, we are absolutely ready for the next adventure. Yes, please. The next refinement, the next creation, the next play. When authenticity in all things is the compass bearing for your life, when your heart is noble, when you know the divine, when you know the animal, when you embrace growth, when you resonate your sovereignty, then, and only then, can you see the truth. The truth that change is our eternal ally. All change. Little changes and big changes. Universe is destroyed and universe is created. Here, all is play. The all is mind. The mind is divine. The empire is ours to create and ours to destroy. It is our creation. We made it. We can unmake it. This will be the last Roamcast for a little while. I am choosing to channel my energies, which are very finite, into some other projects right now. But we'll do this again in due course. I hope you have enjoyed what I have shared with you. I have enjoyed making these recordings, and I shall continue to do so in the future. Thank you for being here. Expressions of soul-deep feeling about reality and relationships, from the kitchen to the grave, from the womb to the mountaintops and everything in between. But what I want to draw your attention to is something even more iconoclastic and innovative than blues, and that is jazz. Why do I like jazz? Simple, because it so swiftly breaks down centuries of old musical structures and does something very new. And it is from the street, it is from the heart, from poverty and vice and sadness and togetherness and being in the moment, and from love, which a lot of imperial music is most certainly not. And it was these musicians from New Orleans and Chicago and New York in the 20s and 30s, and later of course in the 40s and 50s and 60s, which is the sort of music I like, who were doing something infinitely more sincere and substantial than almost anything in the classical genre. People like Miles Davis, John Coltrane, Charles Mingus, Herbie Hancock, Thelonious Monk, Art Blakey, Charlie Parker, Bill Evans, Cannonball Adderley, Chet Baker, Art Pepper, Jerry Mulligan, and loads of other amazing, creative, virtuoso musicians and composers. And for any jazz aficionado out there, which I most certainly am not, I'm sure you would agree that the best entry point into the world of jazz, for those who don't know that music so well, is probably Miles Davis's 1959 album Kind of Blue, which is still incredible today. But the important thing is that this music is very anti-imperial. It is 5 guys in a smoke-filled basement sweating over their fretboards and keys and mouthpieces and drums and microphones. It is a organic human expression of life, an improvisation of what is real. You see that polarity, that interplay, so as I do, to spread awareness, attempting, one would hope, to leverage their technologies for higher purposes. The root of those systems is crooked. It is a bitter root. So for those who are using it as it was designed, which is to socialise online and network intimacies with strangers, that reflects a deep wrongness for me. Facebook makes life worse. And what about Sony and Time Warner and Disney, NBC, Universal, 21st Century Fox, Viacom? Well, they are the 6 conglomerates, to use that old-fashioned word, that constitute 90% of the US and Canadian box office. They are Hollywood, and they are making the movies that shape minds.
And the nature and executive ownership of these organisations, if you don't already know who's running them, what do they have in common? Well, that is worth your investigation. Take a look at that. The Culture Show, well, it did have this very super lady called Verity Sharp, there's a name for you, presenting it for a while, who is just totally lovely. But the narrative that she was reading and that she was presenting, along with other co-presenters, was poor, and it served only to remind me that the culture that is proposed to us as our culture is not our culture at all. Corporate culture is imperial culture. It is the culture of the empire, the music of the hierarchy. It is the art of the godly men, the pharaohs, who are still with us today, in case we'd forgotten that. I have visited many of the centres of cultural excellence in Europe. Italy, France, Germany, Austria, and for that matter, Greece and some of the Eastern European countries like Bulgaria, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, or the Czech Republic as it is now. And emanating from these places, you know, in Rome, Florence, Vienna, Paris, Bonn, Berlin, Salzburg, there's great centres of European, Western and indeed world culture. And occasionally there was some okay stuff on there, but most of the time, and I mean 95% of the time, the culture that they discussed and filmed felt very detached from the life that I saw around me, life in the places that I frequented in the British Isles, like in Cheshire and Manchester and Lancashire and Wiltshire, Somerset, Devon, Cornwall and Cumbria, and further north into Edinburgh and Glasgow. It wasn't the art and the culture and the vibrancy and the human expressions that I saw. It was something else. So I felt it was very unrepresentative, injudicious, misleading even. And so when I used to sporadically sit down and watch this thing, the Culture Show, one question would echo through my mind. And I can clearly recall it now because it's taken on a deeper meaning. One fundamental inquiry into the nature of the culture that they were broadcasting. And that question was this: whose culture? Whose culture are they talking about? Because it's not my fucking culture. And I felt no authentic impulse in it. No resonance of the sovereign human life force. Just little subjective ruminations. No ground-level spiritual dimension, nor any revolutionary perspectives. On the contrary, it just seemed to prop up the empire, the construct, the distortion. And I asked the question today: what culture is it that Los Angeles and New York are dishing up to the world, or Tokyo, Paris, London? You know, do you feel like it's your culture that is being televised and put forth? Is it your culture? Google culture is not human culture. Apple culture is not human culture. Samsung is not human culture. And yet most human beings in America and Britain over the age of 13 use one or more of their products or services every day. And though we may use Facebook and Twitter, indeed...
You are listening to a Roamcast with Neil Kramer.
I'm in a pretty much deserted parking lot on the east side of Portland, and it's funny to be here after having spent the last 20 days really in very beautiful natural locations, out there with the bears and the salmon and the mountain lions, and now I'm here near IKEA. It's a nice contrast, amusing and a little bizarre. And the summer has gone away, I think. The sky is filled with huge charcoal clouds, and it is cooler. It's like 68 degrees, which is fantastic. This is so good. It's so good. And it seems that the food always tastes better as the fall approaches, and people's clothes are more interesting somehow. So I like this time of year. I think a lot of introverted people enjoy autumn. I think this is going to be a bit of a bumper episode with all kinds of interesting things that I want to share with you and reflect upon. The first thing I wanted to consider is culture. This is something I speak about a lot in my work. It used to be a good word, i.e. its natural resonance meant something good, and it mainly doesn't anymore. Because when I speak about culture, I'm not usually talking about human culture. I'm talking about what I refer to as machine culture, which is mainstream, corporate, military, industrial, fake culture that is foisted upon the unthinking rabble and delivered to them to say, this is it, this is your culture, this is what you do, this is what you wear, this is what you listen to, this is what you watch, this is what you read, etc. And in thinking about that, I recall that about 10 years ago, there was this TV show that came on the air on the BBC in England called The Culture Show. And it focused on the arts, literature, film, music, fashion, theatre and so on. And I think it's still going on now, this show. Very British, very conservative, I would say, in its core values. And it was meant to represent the exciting face of refinement, supposedly. And we see that the apparently creative wonders of fine architecture and classical music and painting, literature and cuisine, they all come from these places. The composers that we are meant to revere frequented these places. Beethoven, Bach, Mozart, Chopin, Handel, Brahms, all those guys, those classical radio stations were like presenting this as high art, a pinnacle of human achievement. But what are those composers composing? What are those orchestras playing? They are playing, whether with happy consent or begrudgingly, the music of the empire, imperial culture, the march of the Black Church set to music. Not the most popular view, that. And of course there is so much lovely music to soak up, beautiful, beautiful music. But for me, it's the Russians who seem to imbue real urgency and fire and insurgency into their stuff, like Stravinsky and Shostakovich. Real beauty there that, for me, surpasses Beethoven and Mozart because of what they were doing. Not the structure and the order of the music, which admittedly Mozart and Bach and Beethoven had something very beautiful occurring, there's no question about that. But it isn't the music of the people. The music of the people is more rewarding and meaningful and often much more beautiful than the music of the empire. Centuries of folk music, rich, intrepid, beautiful portraits of real human life, real love and loss and hardship and moments of revelation and revelry, community, melancholy, joy. Let's turn to these shores. We have now, I think, more than a century of blues music. And I was listening to some of these old wax recordings from God knows when, just recently. Amazing stuff right there that pretty much is the foundation for a lot of regular sort of rock music.